question is, what is Islam? Normally, when we talk about these things, we introduce our terms, what we mean by these terms. What is Islam? What do we mean by Islam? Islam is a religion, Islam is a concept, as a cult, as a belief, as a faith, as a community, as a history, as a civilization. So many meanings to Islam, right? And then what is Islamic? That's maybe something that you thought about before, but I believe really important to keep in mind, because just one question. When you think about Islamic history, let's say as a college course, what comes to your mind? Islamic history. Is it just Quran, Hadith, or what else? Some people have studied here. Maybe some people have taken Islamic history classes in college. Yeah, Ottoman history is part of Islamic history, right? Ottoman history is part of Islam. Political history, empires, what else? What else goes into Islamic history?
It involves non-Muslims too, right?
Non-Muslims too. Thank you so much. Non-Muslims who are maybe writers, who are maybe artists, politicians, etc. All kinds of people. They are not Islamic. They are not Muslims, but they are part of Islamic history, right? So textiles. We have this idea of Islamic textiles. We have this idea of Islamic architecture, right? Islamic architecture can be just houses. Islamic city is a city, right? The city itself doesn't have a religion. But then you don't have the same idea, let's say, in terms of Christian history. When I say Christian history, suppose you're taking a class on Christian history in college. What do you learn there? It's mostly religion, right? From Jesus, maybe from before Jesus, from the Old Testament, texts, history, religion, and those kinds of things. So when we say, the reason I'm bringing up this topic, this point, is because when we say Islamic, it's many things. It's not just religion. So we sometimes use the term civilization, maybe culture, maybe society. So to be more, encompassing, right? So more inclusive, and not just the religion itself, not just the Quran, not just Muslims themselves. Islamic art. Some of the greatest Islamic artists, they were not Muslims. They were Armenians. They were, Christians, and so on and so forth. So just keep these questions in mind as we go through. But then I will still say, ask this question at least: does Islam have unity? Right? When we talk about Islam, Christian history doesn't have, if anybody has studied Christian history before, right, doesn't have the same kind of unity. I'll just kind of give the answer myself in the interest of time. So when you ask people here if they're Christians, right, what faith do they believe in? What faith do they feel themselves as part of? Non-Muslims, I mean, they're going to say, well, I'm a evangelical. I'm Lutheran. I'm Catholic, and not necessarily saying Muslim, right? But go ask an Iranian, go ask an Indian, go ask somebody from, let's say, Central Asia, some part of Europe, etc., who are Muslims. They're going to say, well, so there is a very strong degree of unity, regardless of religion, regardless of language, ethnicity, madhab, right? These sects, schools of law, right? Hanafi, etc. So in Islam, so there is a strong degree of unity in Islam, in its art. I'm going to show a couple of examples. Hopefully, some of these will make sense. In terms of Islamic society, in terms of what we mean by Islamic city, there's a concept known in social sciences as Muslim city. Can a city be Muslim? Well, we are grappling to find the best adjective for this Islamic city, etc. But then you don't have the same thing with Jewish city, with like a Buddhist city, a Christian. But in the Islamic, from Mali, Timbuktu, right, to let's say Bukhara, right, and then to Hyderabad, to Sarajevo, right? You have these Islamic cities, very similar, very similar in so many respects. So I'm going to say Islam does have a strong degree of unity across time and space. So it makes this a religion plus a global civilization, right? But then, a big question on the minds of people like myself, again, this is a selective presentation. I'm going to ask the questions that I'm interested in and try to answer them to you in the way that I know. how did we get here? You know, like what is our history? What is our, you know, like this our long form, you know, birth document, long form, you know, biography, etc. Whatever you want to call it. Is it, yes, we believe Islam is revelation, right? Is it, how much of it is divine? How much of this history, this, you know, what we are is, you know, godly designed, godly created? How much of it do you think is, you know, completely divine, total divine, or, you know, some will say, well, no, it's human history. It's just human beings, you know, from this part of the world, that part of the world, believing in this text or the other text, and so on and so forth. This is really, for the most part, non-Muslim perspective on this. But then I'm going to ask, you know, what is best, how to best approach these questions, right? Should we understand ourselves as a product, as a consequence of a long, long history of, you know, God's providence, God's intervention in history, right? Is it the best way? Maybe, I don't know. I'm not going to answer this question. But some of these things I'm just going to ask, right? And then leave it there. Or should we understand it just like the Chinese civilization, just like the Indian civilization, and so on and so forth? So, was this clear? I hope I was clear with this so far. So this is kind of a long introduction. And I may have spent half of my time there, but we'll see. So, again, when we say Islam, Islamic world, someone like me, coming from Turkey, you know, well, I would say maybe Middle East. Middle East probably is the center of the Muslim world, maybe. That's what I'm going to say. But no, it is not, right? Right? Is Middle East the center of the Islamic world? Anybody? I mean, that was my opinion. Historically speaking, yes. Well, Islam emerged in Arabia, which is in the Middle East. The reason we have the term Middle East is actually because of Islam. Yeah. But then, if you look at the population, if you look at the gravity, right? You know, the gravity is here in the region we call the subcontinent, right? India is called the subcontinent. It's not a continent, right? We don't really call India a continent. Because, does anyone know why we don't call India a continent? Because India is larger than Europe, much more populous than Europe, much more diverse, religiously, linguistically than Europe. We call Europe continent, we don't call India continent. So that's an interesting question. But then, well, this is your subcontinent, right? And then maybe the extended India, including the Indian Ocean communities here. That's the gravity. This is where more than half of Muslim world lives in, right? India, Indian Ocean, etc. Those regions. So that's our Islamic world. This is 2009, 2010, but it's still, you know, I mean, fundamentally it's still the same. Okay, so I'm not going to read all of this, but then this is what I follow in terms of my approach, right? This is an author named, you know, Marshall Hudson, you know, a professor passed away years ago of, you know, Islamic history, Islam, and so on. If anybody's interested in, you know, reading, you know, in further readings, I would recommend his work, The Venture of Islam, right? He says, for example, right, Muslims are assured in the Quran, you have become the best community, right? You are the best community raised among mankind. You order good, you command good, and then you forbid evil, right? Does anybody know this term? The Arabic, the original one, the Quranic? Yes, I think yeah, and exactly, right? And then it appears in the Quran in numerous places, right? Not just in one place. I quoted here the, you know, like this one. My apologies, I didn't test some of the pages on this, but this is from the, you know, the chapter Ali Imran, right? A number of chapters repeats this verse. The idea is you are, take a look at this, the best ummah community, right? The best community. Look at this. It's really a very historically, you know, oriented verse, I would say. Raised among, brought forth among humankind, right? You know, acknowledging the humankind, and a Muslim community in the middle of this humankind, and then you enjoin, you command right conduct, and then you forbid evil, right? Munkar, what is known as bad, evil, right? and then you have faith in God, right? So this is understood as a promise, as a vision, as a guiding principle for how Muslims acted throughout history. So this author says, well, this is a very important principle in the way Islam created its own traditions of, let's say, urban traditions, so society, political traditions. This was the guiding principle, right? I'm just going to give one quick example. The so-called morality police, does everybody know what this is? It's kind of like controversial, of course, for so many reasons. But anybody want to say anything about this? Public morals, right? Ihtisab, hisba, etc. Very important aspect of Islam. But then you have in Islam the idea that, well, decency, right? That's important, that matters, and then you need to speak up, right? The Quran is the revelation itself was a huge revolution, huge uprising against the existing social economic situation in Mecca. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, his work was really initially a rejection of the status quo, the norms in the society, right? So this author reads the Islamic history in this light and then says, soon after the emergence of Islam, Muslims succeeded in building a new form of society, right? Distinctive aspects of this society. But look at this. They spread over widely diverse geographies, and then the Islamic culture society came closer than any other civilization before to ruling over the whole world. This is true. We say Islam is the first global civilization. Look at this. This is in the beginning of Islam, very early, within a century of the death of the Prophet. Muslims are here, North Africa and Spain. So they are neighboring communities of West Africa. They are neighboring communities of Europe, as well as Central Asia, India, and almost as far as, well, through context in Central Asia, they are neighboring China. So it's truly a global civilization within 1 century of the emergence of Islam, right? But then I'm going to ask I'll try to draw your attention to a number of, environmental facts as well, right? So I said, well, there are these principles, but maybe somewhere in between these principles, social and economic history, environmental history, take a look at this. This is called the arid zones. This is the map of the arid zones. You all know this, but just it's, I think, helpful to still put it out there and take a look at it. Islam emerged in one of the most arid regions, and Islam spread to, initially, some of the most arid lands in, basically, in the old world, right? This is our old world, right? Including the Sahara, Arabia, most of Iran. Most of Iran is basically desert, and then parts of Central Asia, right? Parts of, half of, important parts of Central Asia is, desert, or it's steppe, right? Very, very still, not very lush vegetation, forested, etc. It's not Europe, it's not Germany, right? So, emerges here. There's a number of reasons this is important. Anybody knows anything about, how water, scarcity of water, availability of water supplies is important to cultures, societies, and then even politics in history? This is pre-modern. You don't just, extract or, use the seawater and distill it, whatever, right? Does anybody know anything about this? Any ideas?
Nomadic people traveling.
You say?
Nomadic traveling where there is rivers,
Yeah.
where there is
Yes.
good or water.
Exactly. This is why you have nomadism, right? Because you don't have water, you don't have, grasses all the time in the way you want your animals will need it. You need grazing lands. These peoples, they tend to be nomadic. People here in Sahara, the Tuareg, right, the Amazigh people, the Berbers, they are nomadic people, right? They are transhuman, move from place to place. People in Arabia, the Bedouin, right? People in the steppes, they are nomadic people. Nomads of, horse, nomads of, goats and camel, mostly in this region. So it determines the way you can establish cities. You can have civilizations. Do you have a civilization? Do you know any history of a civilization in Arabia? Does anybody know of any prominent empires from Arabia? Islam, right? Before Islam, there is none. In the south of Arabia, in Yemen, right? In Saba, in the region called Saba, right? Yemen. Yes, because Yemen is, where does the coffee come from?
Yemen.
And Yemen, you have lots of vegetation in Yemen. It receives lots of rainfall because Yemen is part of the Indian Ocean. It's part of the monsoon winds system. So there's lots of rain in Yemen, in the highlands of Yemen, south of it, including Ethiopia as well. That's why some of our coffees come from Ethiopia, Arabica, etc. The south, yes, but Arabia, no. The Quran itself, another question, what is the oldest book? I keep asking this question to people I know, so if what is the oldest book in Arabic? I'm sorry. Apparently everybody knows the answer. Yes, the Quran, if we speak about books, between covers, right? A tome, a codex. Quran is the oldest book in Arabic. Well, you have some inscriptions on stones, but, well, this tells you something. You don't have a lot of paper there. How do people produce paper? Think about this. In Egypt, people produce paper from using papyrus tree, right? And then in Anatolia, Greeks produce paper using parchments, which is animal skin, treated animal skin. Chinese have developed better ways of producing paper, but because it's very, very essential, they are keeping it secret, not sharing it with anybody else. It's a royal industry, kind of like an industrial secret.
What about Persia? Isn't it a civilization before Islam?
Thank you. Exactly. Persia is a center of a very, very major, very old, civilization. That's true. Egypt, because of the Nile Valley, right? Look at this Babylonia, modern day Iraq, because of the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, Mesopotamia. These are centers of civilization, not Arabia itself. So the way Islam emerges in this very, very arid lands, not in the city of Baghdad, right? Islam didn't emerge in Baghdad, or didn't emerge in Cairo. Well, Cairo wasn't there to be, in the first place, but still, means a lot. Tells us a lot about Islam's history. I'm going to say a couple of things, right? So these are some of the empires or imperial formations at the time, right? This one, for example, is very ephemeral, the Harsha, right? Just one century, but that's fine. This is the Turkic Empire. It's not a very, very concrete, very structured. It's a formation of tribes, really. You have the Roman Empire, Sasanian Empire, and kingdoms here, usually in Ethiopia, in the place we call Nubia, right? In Arabia, in the middle of Arabia, nobody, no one, right? Well, there's some people, but I mean not in the same level as we have in these very important centers of civilization, North Africa, Mediterranean, and then Iran and China and India. Okay, moving on. But then Islam is, if you want to call it unlucky, right? Scarcity of water, that's a problem. You need to manage it. You must have heard of Karl Marx, right? Karl Marx, right? So he says, for example, the societies, he calls it Asiatic mode of production. He says societies who emerge in very, very dry areas, they tend to be more despotic because the control of access, supplies of water is very important, it's very essential. Yeah, you need to regulate these things. You need to create some laws around it. And then maybe you need to use power to enforce these laws. They tend to be more despotic than democratic. You don't have Greece there, right? But then one area, the emergence of Islam really was very, very located in a very interesting way is, what is this a map of? What does this map show?
Spread of Islam in different.
It says spheres of Islam, but what kind of spheres?
Theological, civilization of Islam.
It's basically spheres of contact, cultural spheres, economic spheres, right? Right? But look at this. Islam is part of almost all global cultures. Islam isn't prominent in the Chinese, in East Asian, Sino-Japanese area. Islam is almost not there, not present there. And then also in the Nordic areas, Islam never entered these lands, but in the rest of the world. But especially look at this. The emergence of Islam takes place in the exact center of all trade connections. I'm going to tell you most important trade connections. Trade is important. It's not just you're transporting goods, all ideas. Christianity spreads, Islam spreads through trade routes. Sahara trade, Mediterranean, European, there's a north-south trade, right? From Slavic lands to the south, right? Mostly slave trade. The Silk Road, the Indian Ocean trade, spice trade, etc. Right? All of these things. And Arabs are here in the middle of it. There's a long history to it, but I'm not going to get it. These things you do know, the emergence of Islam. I'm just going to move through slides. Any questions? Any?
So,
Yes, please.
are you saying this is part of divine design?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer. I don't know. But that's a good question to keep in mind. Well, Allahu Alam, it depends on how you want to look at it. You can look at it that way, and then you can try to, from the perspective of hikmah, right? You can try to come up with some answers to it. That's a good question to. The reason I said questions to ponder in the beginning, well, asking and maybe trying to answer as well. That's a quest. There was a comment or a question here.
What was the question? I couldn't hear.
Okay, the question was, what was the question? Can you?
Is this all part of divine design?
Sure.
Yeah. Is it part of divine design? Is it by providence that Islam emerges here? Maybe you can make a case. Again, these are not very scientific explanations because you don't have all the facts. But then it's just a selective look at these things, right? You can argue saying, well, Islam is a claim to say that, well, all these religions, and then Islam supersedes these religions. Why doesn't any other religion supersede Islam then, right? When Islam has this claim. So what makes Islam so special, right? Why doesn't any other prophet come after Islam? So it looks like part of Islam's answer to this question is, well, Islam arrives at a time when a religion can be global. At a place when when a message can go global. Arabic, Islamic coins are here. Islamic coins are here. Islamic coins are here. Part of the reason is Islam didn't emerge here. Prophet Muhammad, he wasn't here. He wasn't, in South Africa, Pretoria, right? But then this is a place where, but then lots of other questions will come. I won't be able to answer those. What happens to people in the New World? Again, keep asking questions. Some of these things we'll be able to answer. Others maybe not. So this is the emergence of Islam. We all know these maps. I told you some of these areas were empires, but then also some dry areas. This is, everyone know what this is? Yes. This is a reconstruction of the Prophet's masjid, right? How close do you think it is to the actual masjid? Does it look like the actual? This is obviously a mock-up, right? We don't know because the actual masjid isn't there, right? The old original masjid isn't there. But we think, based on what we know, all these records, and then the masjid itself is an extension of the house of the Prophet, right? You have covered parts of it, you have uncovered parts of it. There's an entrance, there's a gate, there are walls, you enter, there's a threshold, right? So this is basically the masjid, right? But then, as Muslims expand from Medina, where they don't have any idea of a masjid, does the Quran talk about the masjid? Does the Quran say, well, this is how you're going to build the masjid? Put the minaret there, there's a nice dome, and then there's nothing there, right? So they go and see these places. One of the places they see is this one in Damascus, right? The great mosque called the Umayyad Mosque of Damascus. It was a cathedral before Muslims came, even after Muslims arrived for a long time. Before it was a cathedral, it was a temple. It was a Roman temple, right? So huge history. Christians take it over from Romans, make it a church. Muslims take over from Christians, make it a mosque. And then add some details to it, for example, the ablution fountain, and then there's other things there, of course. And then it becomes the first idea of a mosque, right? One of the first inspirations to build a mosque. Columns, rows of columns surrounding an open courtyard, and there's a closed area. It doesn't have a dome in the sense that in the tradition that will emerge later, right? Quickly, Islam spreads to Spain, North Africa, and Spain. That's interesting. 711, right here. 711 is less than a century after the death of the Prophet. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam.
It's actually Mesquita de Córdoba in
Yes.
Spain is
Yeah.
one of the most beautiful examples
Yeah.
of what you have told us about. The pillars, there is no dome. Yes, this one.
Yeah. So when Islam arrives in these places, looks, absorbs, learns from, and then reproduces it, but then infuses it with its still central vision. It doesn't look like the Prophet's mosque, but it does look like the Prophet's mosque. Right? Essentially, it's the same. It's still the same mosque. You have a closed area, you have an open area, there's an entrance, there's a threshold, there's the idea of liminality, right? To enter a mosque means entering worship, entering the presence of God, right? So there has to be some steps, right? There has to be a threshold you enter, and then which involves, for example, ablution, right? Washing yourself, maybe waiting there, maybe hearing the adhan, and all kinds of liminal, processes going on, right? So this is Cairo one. This is in Tunis, and then the same idea is carried to Spain, right? This is Cordoba. Obviously, can somebody point out the obvious? Is this a mosque?
Probably church.
Yes, obviously. After the Christian takeover, 1200s, right, Reconquista, this became a cathedral. And then, yes, of course, in the center of it, they added the chapel, right, to make sure it's visibly, right, no longer a mosque. And then the idea of rows of columns, right, supporting the structure itself, Cordoba. How about this one? Does everyone know?
Syria?
Yeah, this is from Seville, right? The city of Seville. This is the minaret, right? That is in Seville. Of course, it's turned into a cathedral, but when these Spanish Christians, they turned it into a cathedral, they made this the bell tower, right? They added these, top, a couple of floors on top of the minaret. This is in Seville, and then how about this? Anybody saw this? Anyone from Kansas City? This is in Kansas City. It's exactly the same. It's a replica of the cathedral. This is from Chicago. This is the Wrigley Building downtown. I put an old photo. It's still there. I put an old photo because most of the photos you now have on the web there, you have the huge Trump Tower in the background, right? So I wanted to kind of like have this isolated. It's the same architecture, right? From Spain to Kansas City to Chicago. And then in the morning, there was one speaker, Omar Mustafa, was talking about these Islamic influences in downtown Chicago. The Drew Ali's temple. So we have lots of Islamic influences. So new texts emerge instead of the Kufic, earliest Arabic texts or fonts, scripts, right? You have North African, Maghribi, right? And then you have Spanish styles emerging. So this is the Islamic world around 750s. Again, this is the first global civilization in contact with Indian, Chinese, Central Asian, African, and European spheres of culture, economy, etc. So Islam has this, if you want to look at it from that perspective, a very interesting history of getting into touch with so many very important, actually, civilizations that had greater histories of civilization, scholarship production, right? When Arabs, I'm going to give you an anecdote, when Arab Muslims first conquer Iran, and then they are pillaging the treasures of the Iranian, kings in the palace and looting, etc. During the conquest, right? Looting happens. One of the Arab warriors finds a wristband that belongs to the Iranian Shah, right? Which is very expensive, studded with all kinds of, gems and stones, and let's say it's worth $10,000, right? It's a very expensive item, And then somebody says, sell me this. Sell this to me. Somebody sees it on the sky, Bedouin, right? And I say, okay, I'm going to sell it to you. So how much? 100. And the guy says, okay, I'll get it. Immediately pays him and gets the wristband and then worth tens of thousands of dollars. And then somebody else asked this guy, said, well, why did you sell it so low? We could go higher. He said, is there any other numbers higher than 100? This is an anecdote we have in these, narratives. True, false, but then it still captures the idea that the conquerors themselves were very, very primitive in terms of their learning, sophistication. There is no warfare in Arabia before, there's no conquest. There's no state, there's no government, there are no laws. There's only, these haram, these months that you don't fight, right? There are these arbiters, hakam, right? But then you don't have laws, there's no enforcement, law enforcement. So from that society, to conquer these Roman, Sasanian, North African, very advanced societies, that's a challenge. That's very important. That's one of the questions. Rule over them. So many other questions there, so I'm not going to answer those questions. But then, look at this. Muslims become inheritors of some of the most important civilizations, cultures of the world at this time. Muslims become inheritors. They replace, yes, the Greek civilization. In Alexandria, in Egypt, people no longer speak Greek, but Greek was the language there. But then people begin to speak, yes, Arabic becomes the language of, anybody know the language of the Bible? Aramaic, Hebrew, the New Testament, right? So, Aramaic, somebody said something else. Greek. It's Greek. Why Greek? Did Jesus, did he speak? Did people around him? No. It was the language of the urban elite in the places they lived. It's not, these people are not Greeks themselves, right? They are Aramaic, Hebrew, etc. Arabic becomes that. So overwrites, replaces Hellenistic civilization. You don't have people building theaters anymore because nobody's interested in the Iliad. Nobody's interested in the stories of Achilles and things like that anymore, right? A lot of things change. It replaces, inherits the languages, knowledge, stories, right? The 1001 Nights. Where does these come from? Arabs didn't just make up these stories. They learned it from Iranians who learned it from Indians and so on and so forth. But this is very important. This is a very important note, thing to keep in mind to understand early Islam. So Islam at this point is the wahi, right? The revelation itself, the teachings of the Prophet, right? The idea of the sunnah of the Prophet, right? How to live a Muslim life, right? It's still maintained. But then it's also all these scripts, all this architecture, all this, now knowledge from Egypt, from Babylonia, Mesopotamia, from all these other places. Muslims, I think everyone knows here, Muslims have, by 800, by 900, they became some of the most advanced, maybe the most advanced civilization. Islamic world produces the most paper. That's a very important indicator of scholarship, writing, They have learned how to make paper from the Chinese. They have learned, again from the Chinese, how to make gunpowder. That's very important. They have learned, geometry from these books, mostly in Greek, right? They have learned medicine from Latin and Greek authors of antiquity, right? The antiquity is over, but Muslims are taking over these things. This is why we call Europe Dark Ages, because Europeans are not really studying these subjects anymore. Muslims are studying these ancient authors. I have another part of this talk, if I can. And it has to be, because I'm not going to be able to finish even this one. We'll see. Which is called What Went Wrong? What went wrong? I'll try to talk about that aspect of it. But then, keep this point in mind. This is around the year 1000. What's this a map of? Any guesses?
Second spread of the Mongol invasion.
Not Mongol, but close.
Spread of Turks. Not Turks.
Yes. The elephant in the room. This is the Turkish invasions, right? Turkic, from Central Asia. In the form of primarily the Seljuks. There's the Seljuk dynasty. It's a very prominent empire, powerful empire, emerging somewhere here, probably modern-day Turkmenistan, modern-day somewhere there, right? And then sweep Central Asia, Iran, right? Conquer these places, replace existing dynasties, and then into the Middle East. They are stopped here. They try to enter Egypt. They control Holy Land of Islam, and then they kind of break the stalemate between the Roman Empire and Muslims that lasted there for 3-4 centuries, and then they invade Anatolia, which will become Turkey after this invasion, right? But Turkish-speaking people, you don't have them here before this. That changes history in a number of ways. I'm not going to say, well, because Turks are themselves, the language of Turkish. It's not that, but then. From the moment after 1000, it's the Turkish invasion, the Turkic invasions, right? Because Turkish, in modern day when we say Turkish, it's Turks of Anatolia. But then when I say Turkish, and for the purpose of this class, I mean these Turkic-speaking peoples of Central Asia. Plus the Crusades that are going to happen almost very shortly after, plus the Mongol invasions. Islam community will enter into a period of, let's say, 2 centuries of, shall we call them assault, upheaval, chaos, because, well, I'm from Turkey, but then let's consider this, Turks, Islamized, half Islamized, they enter the city of Baghdad, looting, creating chaos in the city. The people of Baghdad, very educated, libraries, hospitals, universities, madrasas, etc. They don't like the existence of these Central Asian warrior, very, very rough, rude people. They're not happy with them, right? And it's not just that, they create nuisance. They overrun the agricultural areas because they're not interested in growing wheat, but they're interested in grazing their horses or livestock, right? And then they disrupt the agriculture. It's very disruptive, the initial Turkish invasions. That's number one. And continued with the Crusades and the Mongol invasions. Islamic world, Islamic society enters in a period of, I will say, shock, a defense, self-defense, and then a change of mind. Yes? 10 minutes, okay. But then they bring their traditions, from Central Asia, from Iran, of architecture. This is called the four Iwan. The 4 Iwan. Does anyone know what Iwan is? I pretend like I hear you, but I don't actually. Iwan, A1, sometimes called A1.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hallway.
Yes, these are E1s, right? Created pretty much by the Seljuks or implemented by the Seljuks. Look at this. This was the masjid as built by the Abbasids in the city of Isfahan in Iran, right? This is an Abbasid, very old. When I say Abbasid, it's, let's say, 800. Then this is the masjid built by these Seljuks, right? The addition of these E1. Look at this. You don't have these? Right, these huge porticos, right? Mostly for, to make the structure look more impressive, basically. It doesn't add a lot of functionality. And then the adding of the tiles, right? China. They bring their own script. Can somebody tell the name of this script? What do we call this particular script? It means 1/3, a third in Arabic. Nobody's getting A today. Arabic, somebody knows this. A third. I think you were thuluth, right? Let's go thuluth. The thuluth. because it's based on the ratio of these letters, parts of these letters understood in terms of 1 and 2, 2 and 3, a third, 2/3, right? So the letters are related, all these strokes are related. And the emergence of Islam in India, and then the Indian scripture. You must have seen Indian, the Qurans that come from India, they have a particular script, they have a particular way of writing, right? But then you have lands lost in Spain, in the Mediterranean, the Crusades happening in the Mediterranean, and then the greatest shock really for the Islamic world was the Mongol invasions. The Mongols were not Muslim. Initially they were against Islam, they're very aggressively anti, I don't know if this is a right term, but then they made fun of Muslims. They said, well, let's see if your God will protect you from our arrows. But then the initially destructive Mongol invasion becomes something, because Mongols convert to Islam. In the third generation, they will convert to Islam. Then they will build Islam. They will expand Islam, right? All these lands are those lands Mongol lands converted to Islam. And then you have a new now Central Asian, a Mongolian. But then Mongols, when they convert to Islam, a couple of things are going to happen. They're going to adopt Turkish as the language. So they are going to Turkicize. So like in Kazan, in Tatars, in Russia, Chagatais. It's not necessarily Mongol, but then descendants of Mongols. But then they begin to speak Turkish and they convert to Islam at some point. Well, this is not built by the Mongols, but this is just to say, well, the influence of Islam extends into Russia, modern day Russia. St. Petersburg is a new city. I can tell from your eyes, some of you want to pray. The Maghreb. I'm not opposed to this, but I have to show you a couple more slides, okay? And then this is in China, again under the Mongols, right? That's another mosque in China. Sadly I have it here, but I was going to ask if you could read this, right? Al-Masajid, right? Buyutul Muttaqin, right? This is Muttaqin, okay. How about this one? Interlinear translation, China. You know which surah this is from? Yes. Did you read it from the Chinese or the Arabic? Impressive. So this is Islamic world. This is how I want to finish. Hopefully, if I do the second one, I'll try to start from here. This is Islamic world around 1500. I'm going to read you one text. Let me just go through this. This is from Ottoman Empire, and then India, and of course African mosques, right? But then let me read this and then start with my second presentation. By 1500, 1600, this is the 16th century. That's a very important time in world history. Very important. Muslim civilization is a global civilization. People speak among Muslims. People speak Turkish, Mongolian, Russian, European languages, African languages. There are new languages, Swahili, that emerge. There are new, maybe even religions. It's the Sikh religion that emerges as a result of contact between Muslims and Hindus. In contact, a very, very productive civilization, right? Very lucrative civilization, very rich, wealthy civilization. They control Sahara trade, they control Indian Ocean trade, they control Mediterranean, and so on and so forth, you name it. This is the same author, again, one of my favorite authors. He says, look at this. In the 16th century era, a visitor from Mars, as it would happen, right? Somebody from Mars might well have supposed that the human world was on the verge of becoming Muslim. That's what it looks like, 1500s. He would have based this judgment partly on the strategic and political advantages of the Muslims, yes, trade routes and very, very some of the greatest gold mines and so on and so forth. But also on the vitality of their general culture, book production, artistic production. What is the greatest piece of architecture in Islamic history, Islamic world? What do you think? Just we have one Taj Mahal, and any other? The pyramids, probably. Alhambra, thank you. Selimiye, right? These Ottoman Empire. So these, some of the greatest examples of Islamic art, architecture, culture, civilization, were produced in this period, 1500s in Iran, Isfahan, 1500s, 1600, Taj Mahal itself. So they are doing pretty well, culturally, scientifically, economically. It's a brilliant place. And then this argument makes a lot of sense. The world was on the verge of becoming Muslim. What went, you want to call it wrong, from a Muslim perspective? At least, let's not have most all the world Muslim, but why did Islamic society slide so much, I think, right? It's not, we still live in the same places. Okay, so I think, check out it. Do I finish? I'm out of time? Okay. Okay. Thank you so much for patiently listening to my conversation. Any questions, any comments? Okay, that's what I think.